Good morning and welcome to the Forum. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm so glad to see all of you here today on this beautiful day in San Francisco. Every year, Grace Cathedral chooses a theme, and this theme of the 2019 year is the Year of the Body. We also launched a podcast this fall called Above the Fog, and the first episodes are all about walking. It seems especially fitting then that we end our fall season of the Forum with our guest today, who just yesterday completed a monumental walk from Folly Beach, South Carolina to Baker Beach, a journey of 8 months and 3,600 miles to raise money for organizations that serve children. 6 million steps for kids. He is an avid hiker, and he would have to be, I think. maybe he's a formerly avid hiker. A preacher and a writer. He's married to Julia, a therapist, and they have 2 adult children. He has been an Episcopal priest for 27 years, having served 3 churches in Colorado during that time. He has taken a leap of faith and left his most recent position in order to pursue this calling. Please join me in welcoming Peter Munson.
Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm so glad you made it. I was just saying that we were following your progress in March. It just seems so long ago, and to spend every day walking for that long it just seems like such a huge undertaking. So we're glad you made it, and we're glad you're in reasonably good health too.
Thank you.
What were you like as a child? Like when people saw you as a kid, would they have guessed that you would walk across the United States?
I was pretty quiet as a child. I had 3 older sisters.
Oh, yeah.
So some people say you must have been spoiled, and I always have said, well, I kind of had 4 moms.
Yeah.
So sometimes it was, I had to work to get my words in there in that family growing up.
I can imagine.
But I did grow up in a family that always hiked a lot, and we had a pop-up camper that
perfect.
we drove across the country every summer to Colorado to get back to where my mom was from. And I always had my birthday in Colorado, and there was we were very outside-oriented family.
Yeah, well, and even just traveling that far. I mean, I've never driven across the country. I've never walked across the country, and so it wasn't something that's just completely foreign to you in a way that it would be for me.
No.
Who were some of your heroes as a kid? Like, what kind of books were you reading? What kind of people did you look up to?
Well, I grew up in the South in the 60s, and Martin Luther King Jr. has been a hero of mine for a long time.
Yeah.
I guess I read a combination of I was very into sports as a child, so I
was wondering about that.
Yeah, so I definitely read biographies of athletes and things like that. Different types of books related to places. I like learning about different places in the world, whether that's nonfiction or fiction.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was really at one point I thought I wanted to be a sports writer.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so I was really pretty oriented towards sports.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I mean, it does. You have to be really at home in your body in order to trust your body enough to do something like this, and that is one of the gifts that sports gives us over time.
Right.
What about being a priest? Like, how did that come about? Like, how did you get from sports writer to ordination? In a way, you're still kind of writing about it.
It was a very circuitous path getting there. I majored in environmental conservation at the University of Colorado and went straight into law school at the University of Colorado. Thought I wanted to be an environmental lawyer.
Yeah.
By the time I finished law school, I was not at all sure I wanted to be a lawyer. I think it's a great option for a lot of people, but I started realizing that the whole adversarial system doesn't fit me very well, my personality. And a few months after law school, I found myself being a Peace Corps volunteer in the West Indies.
Great.
So I went from law school to Peace Corps.
Yeah.
And I taught high school math in an island called Dominica in the Eastern Caribbean.
Wow.
And that ended up being a huge time of discernment for me. Grew a lot in my faith. read the Bible for the first time,
Yeah.
cover to cover, and a lot of Christian authors, and decided within about 6 weeks of being overseas that I was not going to be a lawyer. And then the question opened up much more broadly, okay, now what am I going to do with my life?
Yeah.
And some things started happening towards the end of my time in Peace Corps that I took as, oh, okay, God, maybe you're trying to get my attention.
Yeah.
I was asked to preach somewhat out of the blue at a church that I was a member of in Dominica. And it was kind of like, where did that come from?
Yeah,
And just wrote a lot, filled a lot of journals, and towards the end of that time, this was, of course, way before email and all that, I wrote my priest in Estes Park and said, I think maybe I'm being called to be a priest. What do I do? And he said, well, you got to come home first. And there's a process.
Right.
So pretty soon after I came home in '85, I started into the Holy Order's discernment.
Yeah, and I can imagine. I mean, there's so many. I have so many friends who are Peace Corps volunteers who went and became involved in kind of international development, international relief work,
Right.
worked for the United Nations, worked for other foreign countries. I have a friend of mine from the Peace Corps who became like the treasurer of like a Pacific Island nation because he could help out in that way.
Right.
But was there any part of you that was drawn in that direction?
Sort of international.
Yeah, you must have
Well,
had a lot of
yeah.
colleagues that were.
Yeah, I mean, two of the four charities that I'm raising money for have a strong international connection, arguably three of the four. My mom grew up in Peru and Chile. My grandfather was a mining engineer.
Oh, yeah.
And so I don't know if I think there just reached a point where it's like, I think the priesthood is what's calling me, so I didn't tend to go that international route. But I think in part of what's true is part of my work as a priest has been holding up for people cross-cultural connections, and the churches that I've served, I've organized a number of kind of international mission trip things. So I guess that's how it wove into my ongoing.
Well, I think too, just I have some friends, and different friends responded in different ways, but I had one friend who was just in a very remote site and was very lonely. And I wonder if that was an element of, being a Peace Corps volunteer for you, or if that was connected at all to this walk too, which is, can be kind of
That's
isolating.
a good question. I got to the Dominica right before Christmas, so there was an unusual thing where I couldn't start teaching till after the New Year, and it rained for 3 weeks straight when I got there, and it was warm at Christmas time, which didn't seem right to me. So there was some loneliness that first Christmas, and then when I started working and meeting people, and I think a lot of that dissipated. I did tell my wife as this walk was approaching, this feels like another Peace Corps time in my life, with some key differences. I mean, it's within the U.S. and it's not for 2.5 years, and but there were dimensions of it that felt like taking a leap into something that's really different from what I had just been doing, and just being open to kind of a whole different fork in the road.
Right.
That
you
felt
really
very
plucked
similar.
out of what is familiar and what is ordinary.
So it felt similar to the Peace Corps in that way.
As a parish priest, what were the things that you really loved, and what were the things that you were less excited about? Like I just think
That's really easy to answer.
Yeah. Well, when people ask me, like, when I retire, I'm going to be on the altar guild. I'm not going to be on the vestry. Do you know what I mean? It's just
I love preaching and teaching and pastoral care. I love coming alongside people in times of transition and challenge and joy and celebration in their lives. End of life, I love all that pastoral. I mean, I think that's the part I felt called to of the priesthood in the beginning. I've never been wild about stewardship campaigns and the administrative side and having to hire and fire. I've learned how to do all that, as a rector, hiring and firing and managing staff. But the more financial, how are we going to grow? And, I don't know. I just, after 27 years, I feel like I can't go to another workshop on how to make a church grow or whatever.
Right. Yeah, exactly. We're always invited to them, aren't we?
Yeah.
I wonder too, just like how your faith has changed over that time too.
Over the time I've been a priest?
Yeah, exactly.
That's a great question. I guess I'd start with my prayer life has been deeper over time.
Yeah.
I've realized, I think, a fairly long time ago that if I didn't start my daily routine with quiet and prayer, my days just didn't work very well.
Yeah.
So even on this walk, I've gotten up and always started with, 20, 25 minutes of quiet, and that's just been, we talk about spiritual practices, and I love that word of practice.
Yeah.
That you don't arrive. It's a practice, and you keep practicing. And so the practice of reading Scripture and praying and acts of service, I really can see how doing those over 30 years has really formed me. It's something that you stick with.
Yeah.
Just like I've been a runner for about 40 years. And when you stick with something and keep practicing it, it does form you. And what's also true, I think the other answer to your question is I've really believed the congregations I've served have formed me.
Yeah.
Those relationships with the people in the congregation, they have formed me as a priest. And there's a give and take there where our congregations, it's not just what I do as a leader, but how they impact and how I learn from them.
Yeah, I mean, what it does is it brings us into contact with just extraordinary people,
Right.
and you would never know. I mean, they just look perfectly ordinary in the front, but behind them, that they just took homeless people into their own home and cared for them, or just spectacular, generous. And you're right, they do. They're kind of like examples to us and encourage us.
Yeah.
I do agree that, like, if you do something over time, you get shaped. I think that's part of I think there's almost two kinds of ways of being religious. One is the way of talking about just kind of like an instant moment of conversion.
Right.
And the other is like just making this gradual progress
Yes.
over time. And, Jesus' stories, like the things that he chooses to emphasize, end up being things that we just internalize in such a deep way. I think Jesus has kind of like a way of talking about fairness, for instance, that so many times it comes up. And I think it changed my expectations about how I live now versus, when I was a younger person.
Right.
But yeah, I when Rebecca was talking about your inspiration for taking this journey, she described it as more like a conversion experience. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that. Like, where were you in just like your life and geographically when this idea came?
Yeah, I love talking about that. I was finishing up a hike in Rocky Mountain National Park, which has kind of been my backyard for a long time. When I was in college, there's a huge Y camp in Estes Park called the YMCA of the Rockies, and 3 of the 4 summers I was in college, I was a hike master. Very funky word, but I had the privilege of being paid almost no money, but being able to take guests on hikes like 6 days a week.
Wow.
And by the 3rd summer, I was looking for the most obscure places to take guests to in the park. But there's a particular hike I love doing different times of the year. I often do it on my birthday, but 11 years ago, almost to this November 20th,
Wow.
I was finishing up a hike in what's called the Glacier Gorge Valley, and I was almost back to my car, maybe 1.5 miles from finishing the hike. And I just heard a message. It was not audible words, but it was like a Holy Spirit download or something.
Yeah.
And it was within about 10 seconds.
Right.
And I heard walk across the country, speak and write along the way, and raise money for people in need. And I didn't have it narrowed down as to who I'd be raising money for at that moment. And I came home and I was, I don't even know how I drove home, but I was so excited, and I walked in, and my wife, who's sitting right over there, I said, I just got this message, and she was really excited for me, and I told her what it was, and she said, just be aware it might not unfold in the way you envision it today. And I was like, ended up being so prophetic, because in my mind, I was like, oh, I'm going to go in a couple of years,
Right.
and I'm going to raise money for Episcopal Relief and Development, which is one of the 4 organizations. But I mean, I didn't know last year I'd be starting a nonprofit, so that when people make their donations, there'd be a tax deductible,
Right, or even, it was just like, I remember what it was like serving in churches in 2008. It's just like the economy was going,
right,
and there's so much anxiety in our,
yes.
We wondered if the banking system was going to fail.
Exactly.
And the church was the one place where you could kind of be yourself, which is completely crazy because all this stuff was happening, because in your office, you had to kind of keep it together. So it was a tough time to be in church.
Yeah. So as I've walked across the country and given these talks, I've talked a lot about calling.
Yeah.
That I tell people, you're probably not called to walk across the country, but I believe God is calling all of us. And I also believe that our calling can shift, or the way we're called can change over time. So maybe you're in, the way you're called when you're finished with high school is one, where am I going next?
Yeah.
But when you retire, or maybe you're in midlife and you feel called to change your career, there's all these moments of potentially taking big leaps. And how are we listening? I think God is calling us all the time.
Yeah.
And how are we listening for that call? And what's can be blocking us? Like maybe we've heard it, and I think the big thing, if I were to point to one thing that can get in the way, is fear.
Yeah.
Right. And I have a mentor who says fear is not meant to be a destination. So you're going to have fear.
Right.
But how do you keep going, or how do you move beyond the fear, or how do you take the energy of fear and kind of channel it into? So this was the next part of my calling. I'm still an Episcopal priest. I'm probably going to be serving another church here, hopefully in another month or so. But this is the next part of my calling as a priest.
And I mean, when you describe that moment of just like hearing from God, I definitely, I have felt that too. And I think even secular people have had a sense of direction. And, and I think it's important that because there's so many distractions, especially now with the cell phones and everything. It is they had the 50-mile and the 50K walk yesterday for North Face, and so you saw the people, right?
Yes.
Wearing their.
We were in the way, unfortunately, now and then. So
we
were trying. People were yelling us, "Stay to the side."
That was them.
I didn't. That was 50 miles.
But did you notice how many of them were interacting with their phone in some way, either touching their phone or with the headphones? Or it is like, if God is trying to get through, God's going to have a harder time. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're going to have to interrupt.
God's going to have to get tech savvy or something.
Yeah, exactly. So what kind of preparations did you have to do in order to get ready for this trip? Like, I can imagine you had to choose the route and decide like kind of what support you're going to have, and et cetera. How did you work that out? What was the longest walk that you'd been on before this?
The longest walk? Well, this is kind of funky, but when I was in the Peace Corps at the high school, I started a hiking club, which I heard is still going.
Oh, that's great. I love it.
And we did a walk one summer around the perimeter of Dominica, which is 128 miles.
Yeah.
The longest walk I did with them one day, which is still the longest I've ever done, was from town to town. We did like 36 miles, but
I've walked that far in a day before.
Yeah, but on this walk, the biggest day I had was 26 miles.
Yeah, that's good.
But on the preparation, I had another wise person in my parish that said, Peter, you've climbed most of the 14,000-foot peaks in Colorado, but you haven't backpacked day after day after day. Maybe you ought to try that before you walk across the country.
Right, before you tell everybody.
Yeah, yeah. And so there's a great trail in Colorado that was completed in the 80s called the Colorado Trail. It goes from Denver to Durango.
Oh, wow.
And it's 500 miles, which isn't that long, but it's got 89,000 feet of vertical gain over the course of it.
89,000?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's
So,
amazing.
well, Colorado is the highest elevated average elevation.
Right, exactly.
So I did that over 3 summers. I did about 250 miles the first summer. But backing up, on the 3rd day, I was in great pain.
Yeah.
I had, for those of you who read Wild, I had a backpack that was too big. I had backpacked before, but not days at a time.
Yeah.
And I met a young man on the trail the 3rd day, 23 years old, from Georgia, who'd
Walked there.
hiked. Well, he'd done the whole Appalachian Trail.
Yeah, that's great.
And he said, do you want me to go through your pack with you? And I said, yes, please. And get rid of this, get rid of this, get rid of this. So I learned a lot and changed almost all my gear, what I was wearing, what I was carrying.
So what do you wear? Like, and what is the summary of his advice? Because John Muir took those walks. I mean, would walk to Georgia, and I don't even know what he carried.
Well, I did definitely get some lighter equipment. I had a tent that I thought was pretty light, but I got one that was probably half that weight.
Yeah.
I have this great small down jacket that is really great for warmth for at least 3 of the seasons of the year, and it weighs 9 ounces.
Oh yeah. Wow.
So there's equipment
right,
that
that's how you can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the other part of my preparation that I really want to mention is I formed a support team, and we met all last year once a month at our home. And there were 10 or 13 people. In fact, sometimes people would join from other states through Zoom. And that group was tremendously helpful. And in all sorts of ways, including on the walk, they would help call ahead to churches to help me find places to stay.
Right.
I only camped 4 nights in my tent on this journey out of
great.
250 some nights.
So many people helped you.
Yeah. And there was one man who was retired from IBM who's really into spreadsheets who we sat down last year probably 8 or 9 times and worked on the route. Yeah. And it was a combination of Google Maps hitting the walk function, but also places I wanted to go.
Right.
So I didn't always go the most direct route.
Yeah, no, I noticed that the path, that there's not meanderings, but
Tennessee, I did
it's not the direct, the big S.
Big S.
Yeah. No, I totally wondered about the people who helped you. But so what was a normal day like for you? Like you'd wake up and you have some time to spiritually prepare.
I usually would be in someone's home. That was the norm. So I'd have quiet time, get up, have breakfast with them. They would usually take me to the place on the route where I'd stopped the day before.
Great.
I'd normally be walking by 8, with the exception of Kansas. I was in Kansas all of July. So I started at 6:30 or 6 in Kansas and tried to be done by 1 because it was like 102 by 1 o'clock.
Oh, yeah.
And I generally walk 15, 16, 17 miles in the beginning in the east, and then as I got to the Midwest, I was going between usually 18 and 21 miles a day. So 3 miles an hour, pretty much however
just
you
how we all walk.
Pretty much however you do it, uphill, downhill, hot, cold. So 7 hours of walking if you're doing 21 miles plus breaks. So I'd walk like 8 to 4, 8 to 4:30.
Yeah.
And then usually someone would pick me up and they'd say, what do you want to do first? And I'd say, take a shower, thank you very much. And then I'd be sociable and
for like 20 minutes and then you fall asleep.
I've been journaling and trying, I like to write, so I've been blogging and journaling, doing a handwritten journal as well.
Have you had a chance to review those journals or notes?
I've started to. I just started reviewing the first one. I'm on the 3rd one now.
Yeah.
Well, it's a combination of, what happened during the day, statistically, but a big part of what's in there are the people that I've met and
Yeah.
the stories and the interactions, because I've had some really, the hospitality of the people hosting me, but also the people I've met just in the course of the walking has been really incredible. Sometimes funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a guy early on in Georgia. I was at a gas station getting a Gatorade or something, and he saw my pack, and he asked me what I was doing, and I told him, and he goes, "How did you happen to do that?" And I said, "Well, I'm responding to a message I heard from God." He said, "I don't believe I love God that much."
That's
So
true.
it's like, what can you say, man? It's just
The highest
I just
compliment,
started laughing, going, "Well, okay."
Yeah. That's great. What are
So-
some of your other memories of the trip? Like, I mean, you must have seen some beautiful things and been scared, and you know.
I've had three moments that stand out as the scariest. I was charged by 5 dogs at once in Sewanee,
yeah.
Tennessee,
Yeah.
and the owner of 4 of the dogs came out when the dogs were like as close as you are.
Yeah. Wow.
And I started carrying a stick after that day. And then I've had 2 close calls with lightning, one in Kansas
I
and
thought
one in
that might be-
Colorado.
Kansas and Colorado.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some other dog things, but after I had the stick and I decided I needed to be as alpha as the dogs, that started working better.
Yeah.
Sometimes with loneliness, for sure. I mean, I would say the hardest part of the journey was not the physical. It was, my wife and I had never been apart for more than like 2 weeks.
Completely.
So that part was challenging.
Yeah.
And she flew out different places
Yeah.
to meet me, which was wonderful. But there was a time in Missouri where I was didn't have a speaking engagement on a Sunday. I was in a small town for the whole weekend. I was the only one in the hotel the whole weekend.
Wow.
And it
That's
was like,
amazing.
that was the day kind of loneliness really
Yeah.
hit me.
Yeah.
I started
definitely.
calling my friends and
Completely.
Yeah.
Get the cell phone out and call
Yeah.
everybody on the contact list.
yeah, so.
Yeah. What
But-
about some beautiful things you saw?
Yeah, well, in terms of, nature, I had 2 days that really stand out when I wasn't on roads. One was in the Great Smokies National Park,
Oh, wow.
18 miles, and
Ah.
a local Episcopalian who was 77, which was the age my father was when he died, found out what I was doing early on and said, "I'd like to be your guide." And we
Wow.
had an amazing day, 70 degrees, sunny.
Oh.
And it was spectacular. And then my friend Tim who's here in Park City, Utah. I had a day kind of going over one of the mountains on the ski slope, and it was in the fall. And I was a day that came after I was just so sick of walking on roads. The timing was perfect.
Oh, that's great.
And but I would say the blessings that stand out overall are how generous, I
Yeah.
learned one of the things I wanted to learn, Malcolm, was what is it like to really radically trust God on a daily basis?
Right.
And this walk is like a recipe for that.
Yeah.
Because whether it's weather or dogs or food or where I'm going to stay, my wife, last year was like, "You got to get all your places lined up of where you're going to stay." And she's really organized and I'm not.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Well, yeah, but I'm not sure I want to have it all planned out."
Yeah.
And then I'd get on the, be walking and not have a place lined up. And I was
21
like, I should have
miles.
listened to Julia. But the ways people showed up and provided.
Yeah, I mean, it's
and-
biblical. I mean,
yeah.
Jesus sends his friends out and,
Right.
to go and depend on the hospitality of
Exactly.
other people. And you're really living that instruction.
Yes. And also that line in the Lord's Prayer, "Give us this day our daily bread."
Yeah.
I've really appreciated that on a whole new level. It's like, can you give me what I need this day? Not live in the past of what didn't go so well with the dogs. Not futurize, where am I going to be staying next week and will I get there on time? But can I trust that I'll be provided what I need for this day.
Yeah.
And I have a testimony that that's what happened.
Yeah.
You know, I was provided for in every way.
Yeah.
And it's been amazing. I mean, it's like, oh, I took this leap, and when I say every way, I mean every way. I mean, I quit my job.
Right, exactly.
And we've been provided for financially, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an amazing thing. I wonder if we've mentioned John Muir. I also think of Wordsworth and Coleridge, and I think of Henry David Thoreau.
Right.
Like there are just some very prominent walkers in
Yes.
history, and now you're one of them. But I wonder if you found inspiration from them, or you learned things from them, or if their situations are so different from yours that they're just nothing that translates into your experience.
Edward Abbey comes into my mind.
Yeah, I was thinking of Edward Abbey the whole time. I just didn't want to ask about a Utah guy when you're a Colorado guy. I just didn't know if you guys crossed paths, you know? It's just like people saying, oh, I know about California. I've been to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
But yeah, Edward Abbey, yes. You're like the closest to Edward Abbey I've ever met. And this is the Monkey Wrench Gang.
Yeah, right. I have a friend who I met who walked across the country in 2010, and he's become a walking activist, meaning he's in Denver, and he'll film like he'll video a stretch on a busy street in Denver where there's no sidewalk, and it's really made me think about, are we walking anymore?
Right.
Especially when we could walk.
Yeah.
You know, we live in a new development where the main grocery store is 1.5 miles down the hill from our house. And it's like, well, that's not that far. We can go walk to the grocery store.
Right.
Why do we have to drive?
Yeah.
And I get that depending on where but then you start looking at, are cities or are places set up for walking, or are you just taking your life in your hands?
Yeah, Rebecca Solnit wrote a book called Wanderlust. I recommend it so highly to you because there's so much of that she describes as just what you were saying, which is there's like walking has political meaning too, being free. But you're right. We moved to the suburbs for a period in our life. We'd never lived in the suburbs before, and the entrance and the exit was right here. And if you lived here and the grocery store is there, you'd have to drive out to go all the way back around. It was impossible to walk.
Yeah.
And all the major thoroughfares said no pedestrians, no walking along the sides of the roads.
It's crazy. But there's something different that happens when you walk.
Yeah.
You know, the encounters are different. The way people are somewhat surprised that you're walking is part of what happens. But I mean, you see things differently when you're going at 3 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And I was walking intentionally to identify with people in the world that still have to walk, you know.
Right, exactly, completely.
To where they're going,
yes.
whether it's to church or work or school or to a medical clinic. And I have people saying, man, you'd be getting there a lot faster if you biked. And one man, I think it was in Kansas, said, you should be taking a bus. You should be taking a bus. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of missing the point.
Well, otherwise you'd be the person who rode a bus across the country. It does. We have a tradition of taking questions on note cards. So Rebecca Nessa will collect your questions. I have been thinking a lot about that book by Rebecca Solnit because, there are different societies that are set up for walking in different ways too. And I don't know if you've ever traveled in England, but just the walking system. So it's almost like there's a rite of passage that you have, I don't know how to describe it, but you have legal rights to cross people's property. And I wonder if you thought about like the private property issues. And I also wonder if just some more pedestrian questions. Did you get lost? Did you have a hard time finding your way, or cell phone technology making everything easier for us?
I got lost a couple times briefly in cities.
Oh yeah,
when I was in the rural areas, usually I was following a road for a while.
Yeah.
But I would usually, I don't know, I guess I like to write, but I would usually take the phone directions from Google Maps, and if there was a lot going on, I'd write it out the day before, so I wasn't looking on my phone the whole time.
So you were writing in notebooks, and then you just
Mhm.
mailed the notebooks to, on, so you weren't carrying all the old notebooks?
No, it was just like a sheet of paper.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Yeah, when I finished journals, I would
Mail
send
them.
back.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Or when my wife met me, I'd send her home with
all these papers. I could just imagine the kid from Georgia saying, "You get like 90% of your weight is journals."
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe you can describe some of the the funny characters that you met along the way, like some of the people that you think of.
I stayed with a sheep farmer in western Kansas, and I ended up staying with him for 4 or 5 nights. And Episcopalian, a small little church
great.
in, I think it's Dakin, Kansas, where the is it Dakin or Lakin? I've forgotten. The church meets in the priest, who's a woman, they meet in her home.
Oh yeah.
It's a house church.
Yeah.
Funny story about how they took out a window to put the altar through her living room and into her living room.
Yeah.
But the first night I was at Bob's house, some of the sheep made a jailbreak, and I got to help him and his what are those dogs called?
Border collies.
Yeah, border collies, kind of get them back
That's
in.
great.
the
The
pen.
perfect thing.
Yeah.
You were helping find the lost sheep.
It's like I was being the little wall. And let's see, what else stands out? I don't know. Just I got to stay with one of my seminary classmates in North Georgia and his wife, and I hadn't seen Sam in a long time.
Yeah.
And we just reconnected, and
What fun.
there was some Episcopal schools that his wife is a nurse at one of the Episcopal schools, so I got to speak there. And there was a great time in Georgia at one of the other schools I went to where they were keeping me from leaving, and I didn't know why, and it was because one of the teachers got the idea that they should take a collection for me after I spoke.
Oh.
So he went around all the classrooms, and the kids were just great about pulling whatever was in their pockets.
Yeah.
So I got a Hershey's Kiss, and I got quarters, and then a couple kids just wrote me notes.
Oh, yeah.
And it was really special.
That is so
Yeah.
special. People talk so much about the polarization of our country politically, and I just wonder how that played into what you did.
Yeah, I definitely stayed with people who were, I would say, across the political spectrum. But what was consistent was they were curious about what I was doing and wanted to support me and were generous.
Yeah.
Generous in their hospitality.
Yeah, that's great. It just seems like a good time to be building bridges for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, here's a great question. What did you eat for lunch?
Yeah, I usually
Oh man, what did you eat for everything?
I did 2 things. I either packed a lunch from the people I'd stayed with in the morning, or I did Subway a lot, but if there was a local diner, I wanted to kind of have the local experience. So
Yeah.
if I was walking by at the right time and there were a bunch of cars there, it's like, well, that's where I should go eat. So I had some fun experiences in local diners.
I can
Yeah.
imagine. Oh, those meals must have been so good.
Yeah.
Out of the 200 plus days, how many did you walk alone?
Ooh. I don't know the exact number, but the answer is most of them.
Yeah.
I did have, as I got closer to Colorado especially, friends came out. One of the most amazing things that happened was I walked Highway 50 in Nevada, and we kind of realized,
Wow.
I guess they call that the loneliest road in
Right,
America.
exactly.
We realized with planning that I wasn't probably well served to be in my tent every night, especially with long stretches with no water.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So 4 of my friends took turns with the first friend, drove out his truck and camper,
what a great idea.
and then the other 3 relieved him successively.
Yeah.
About 8 days for each of those 4 friends to get me across
Wow, the
Nevada,
Great
and they
Basin.
shadowed me with the camper,
Wow.
and some of them walked with me.
Yeah.
So that was amazing, and it was amazing weather, cold a couple mornings, but just sunny, and it was actually enjoyable going across Nevada because of the support I had.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so you came 50 all the way into Sacramento.
Yes.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
What theology do you draw on for this kind of intentional, arduous service? And how did looking for ways to lighten your load contradict that? Interesting. What theology do you draw on for this kind of intentional, arduous service?
What a great question. That's a new one. I guess I would say
Thank you.
it kind of comes back to what I said about calling. Part of it did not seem arduous to me because when I first heard the message, it's like, I love walking, I love preaching, I love writing, I love cross-cultural connections. Okay, God, you teed up something for me that is about 4 areas of my passion.
Yeah.
And I think that was hugely helpful on the days that I did have days when I wanted to quit.
Oh, I totally wondered
yeah.
about that. That was one of my questions.
Yeah, Julia talked me off the ledge one time after the lightning storm in Kansas. But because it was things that light me up,
Yeah.
that were all kind of in one package of go do this, it didn't generally feel arduous to me.
Yeah.
And I guess the other part is, if I believe it's God calling me, then I guess my theology is I want to be a follower of what I hear God. I guess it's theology of following
Discipleship,
Christ
yeah.
and discipleship.
Yeah.
I want to be faithful to what I hear. And it wasn't going away. I mean, part of the reason I did this after 11 years, 10 years of message, is it wasn't going away.
Right.
So, and then in terms of lightning, I don't know. That kind of fits with Jesus' story with the going out in twos and don't take
Yeah.
extra clothes. And
Right. Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's great. Wow. Please offer your witness to our divided nation, red and blue. Witness to virtue and unity in our nation, please. Okay. I will tell you, today, hundreds of us who, as pedestrians, survived crashes in San Francisco will walk at 3 o'clock at City Hall as a memorial to those who perished in 2019.
oh, wow.
There's so much happening with walking and
Yeah.
hiking and running. You
Yeah.
came here at the right time.
Yeah.
How many pairs of shoes did you go through?
I've pretty much more or less worn out getting here my 6th pair of shoes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right in a row.
Yeah.
How did you know when they were totally worn?
There was no tread on the bottom, was
Yeah.
basically. One pair I wore too long and I had a hole right through the,
Toe, yeah.
yeah. Right through the bottom.
What about your injuries, like your physical health? Did you lose a lot of weight? Did your feet hurt all the time?
I lost about 8 pounds in the first few weeks, and then I just leveled off because people were feeding me so well.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad.
Yeah. My feet have generally been sore. I would say the first few weeks was my big adjustment to that.
Yeah. So the first few weeks, so after
They
like
were really sore the
2 or
first
3.
few
I mean, I was looking at the people who are running the 15-mile
yeah.
race, and you could see on their faces how much their feet hurt.
Yeah. And then my big challenge is in my smallest left toe, which just seems like a great symbol or something. I don't know, but in terms of the parts of the body are all important. But I got a blister in Missouri, which was over half of the walk ago, and then it eventually. I was managing it, and I got almost to call it my home, and I actually had to stop. It got infected. And I had to get a ride from my sister's house in Colorado Springs to Denver, where we live in the Denver area. And I had to stop for a while.
Yeah.
And it became what's called a pressure ulcer. It's much deeper into my toe. And I felt that as I was walking just over here today. So I've just had to kind of, it needs a rest.
Right,
Yeah.
completely.
But
Completely.
it became manageable, and it's like, okay, I can.
Yeah.
It was just reminding me that it was there every day. Yeah.
Right. No, I can imagine. But
Yeah.
and probably worse at the end of the day than
Yeah.
at the beginning day. Yeah. Did you hear about other people's callings? And were there any surprises as you've been listening to other people?
Well, come back to Bob, the sheep farmer. is one example that he was from California and majored in, I think it was wildlife biology at one of the California universities, and ended up in Kansas because they were doing some big hiring back in the, I think it was in the 70s, for wildlife biologists. And he worked for the state for about a year and said, this is way too much bureaucracy for me. And he had started working for a sheep farmer, kind of as an apprentice or helper.
Right.
And then decided it was his passion.
Yeah.
And then started buying bought his own land and bought his own sheep. And
Wow.
so I don't know, my story is, why would you leave California to go to Kansas? But he was super happy and had found what he was supposed to do in life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you ever talk to what were some of the questions that younger people ask you, like the kids in this different schools? Did they ask questions about calling too?
They would say things on the level of, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
And don't you get bored? And
Oh. What did you say to them?
Don't you miss your wife?
Yeah,
You
you're
know,
like, "I
they
do miss my
they
wife."
asked some questions about connection and relationships
Yeah.
for sure. What do you listen to music? I get that one a lot. Do you listen to music and not podcasts? And I haven't, because especially with walking on roads, I've just wanted to be paying attention.
I feel that way about, I rode my bicycle here this morning, and I'm always 100% paying attention in San Francisco.
But yeah, I think the kids would ask, like, did you always want to do this? And what's true is, when I can't remember when the book came out by Peter Jenkins. I was probably for me, end of high school or early college when he walked across America. But I read that book years ago, and I certainly didn't think afterwards, oh, I'm going to go walk across the country someday. But I think their wheels were spinning about, how did you decide to do this? And I would say to them, kind of what I said earlier, you're probably not called to walk across the country,
exactly,
but
you
pay attention
listen
to the things that you really feel like that light you up, and that.
How is it, like, you've had a lot of time to think while you're out there. I especially wonder just about climate change and, how nature is changing, and, just where you got on thinking about that and talking about that too with the different people you came across.
Well, I had someone say to me, well, with all the rides back and forth you're getting, it's probably good that you're not raising money for
That's funny, yeah, I guess
for zero carbon or whatever. Yeah, I do think about that generally in my life, from even the very visible level of trash by the roadside to
right, exactly.
Yeah. And just the cars, I don't know, it sounds silly, but it's like, where are all these people going, And obviously, when you get to the cities, it hits me, there's a lot of people, you know, and whether it's planes or cars, and then the juxtaposition of, like, it would be weird for me when someone would come out and walk with me in Kansas, and then they'd leave and say, yeah, I'll be home in 7 hours, and I was like, well, I'll be there in a month, and
Yeah, right. Right, just how different that experience
how
is.
different. That's not quite what you're asking about climate change, but our convenience of, our inventions are helpful to us of getting around the world, but they come with a cost.
Even here, what happens is, it's almost, everything is built by humans for one reason, and then we use it for some other way. And I do think about just housing in San Francisco is so expensive that for many people, they have to drive in these, congested highways. And
the last church I served was in Boulder. We couldn't afford to live in Boulder, so same thing.
Yeah, it's like the lives of quiet desperation that the road talks about.
Yeah.
Tell us about the couple you met in Nevada.
The couple I met in Nevada. it might be a reference to the other walkers. I met a couple walkers in very western Utah, Hannah and Canyon. They're a great story. Hannah's 23, Canyon is 21. They both worked for a year in AmeriCorps, and they did their initial training together, working in different parts of the West, weren't on the same team. He got the idea as he flew to California to start his work from Washington, D.C., that he was going to walk back home after the work.
Right.
And she, right before Christmas, they're halfway through their work, she finds out that he's going to walk across the country, and she says, I want to go with you.
Wow.
And he goes, to his credit, he goes, well, why don't you think about it over Christmas, and then after Christmas if you still want to do it. But the way I met them was so fascinating. This was when I had support in western Utah and Nevada, and my friend Tom was waiting at the very end of the day. His truck was on the side of the road, and if I would have been there 10 minutes earlier, I would have never met them. Yeah. They were coming from San Francisco.
Yeah.
And we met literally at his truck.
That's amazing.
And they're the only people I met walking across the country while I was doing it.
Yeah.
And we started talking, and we gave them food, and they had they were walking across Nevada, so they had one of those carts, mainly pushing water, plus their backpacks. And I just assumed they were a couple right away.
Yeah.
And within about 2 minutes, Hannah goes, oh no, we're not a couple. And I'm like, wow, you just joined in with this guy, you're staying in this tent with, and she goes, oh yeah, we've been having fights the first 3 weeks. And she goes, I was a college athlete and I want to get 20 miles every day. And he wakes up and goes, oh, look how beautiful it is outside. But anyway, we ended up taking them in for a couple nights into our camper. Yeah. And they're now in Colorado.
Oh, wow. Yeah, because you can follow their trip.
Yeah, and we're following each other on Instagram.
Oh,
and
my goodness.
they're raising awareness for environmental health and mental health.
Ah, right.
They're talking about, we know people that struggle with mental health, and we feel like when you get outside and you experience nature, that really can help with that.
Yeah.
So they're awesome. And I think they're learning how to get along with each other.
Yeah, right. It's funny that you mentioned this, because I always said the same thing with my brother. I'm like, I'd always like to walk home from college. And one night in August, we were just up on the top of the mountain. I said, let's walk home tomorrow. And so the two of us did it. It was like a 70-mile walk through, but we didn't even pass a road like for the first day. And then we followed the rail lines, so we never passed roads even then. So it was like almost like we didn't cross any streets almost to get there. And we had to, of course, go across.
Story.
It was such a cool story. But I mean, I'll always remember what it was like. We were in the Carquinez Straits and just like this little beach where the whole delta opened up there, and waking up in a field near Travis Air Force Base, which is in the Central Valley. But yeah, it was. You're right that it was a sense of calling, but it wasn't as big a deal. But it was our thing to do together.
And it can be a smaller thing. It doesn't have.
Yeah, and we'll always have that in common. We'll always have that experience. And we stopped, and we were on a railroad bridge in the middle of the delta. And so it's all like causeways and raised railroad. And my brother, we were praying in the morning. And my brother left his watch on a little stump, and then we went. And there's no way to get back to it. The only way to get that watch is to walk all the way back, because there's no way you can drive there. But anyway, so we have many happy memories of that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Tell us a little bit about the groups that you were supporting, the money that you were raising, and the groups that you were helping.
That's my cue to, I guess, to say that I have business cards. So if any of you want to follow me or might want to make a donation, I'd be happy to give you a business card afterwards. 2 of them are affiliated with the Episcopal Church. Episcopal Relief and Development has a newer initiative for children called 1,000 Days of Love. And it's focused on both early childhood education and health for birth to 6-year-olds.
Yeah.
We were able to give a distribution.
Early childhood education is so important.
Yeah, we were able to give a check from what's been given through the donations to my walk. Yesterday at Baker Beach, we
Oh,
were able to
great,
present
great.
a check to
Yeah,
ERD
neat.
for $7,500.
Yeah.
My own diocese, scholarships for kids to go to summer camp and youth retreats
Yeah.
and youth leadership initiatives. The two others are smaller and ones I've had direct involvement with that I'm really passionate about. Someone was asking me, you know, how did you come up with children as the theme? And I was like, well, I'm inspired by some amazing work I see people doing to serve children.
Yeah.
And there's a children's home in El Salvador, La Libertad, that it's a Christian organization where the director is from Guatemala, Maria Gonzalez, and 7 other women are, one time they have 50 to 80 children that have been abused or neglected. They also have a K through 12 school there. Just doing amazing work, loving kids back from difficult times and trying to, you know, bring healing into their lives through love. And then in Denver, I was looking for something local, and I kind of followed the breadcrumbs in some funky meetings, or through my wife, I met some people. But there's an organization called Street Fraternity that mentors teen boys and boys in their early 20s. They've all come to the U.S. as refugees, mostly from Asian and African countries. And they're at risk because most of them spent a big part of their childhood in refugee camps in countries not their own.
Right, right.
And they miss some education, and they're at risk for, you know, high odds that they won't finish high school. So it's a mentoring program for men to come along after school and
Build those
guide,
bridges.
build relationships, build bridges, say, you know, you can do it. And the man that's the executive director is totally come full circle because Yoel came from Eritrea when he was 12 with his family.
Wow, that's great.
And he went to Denver High Schools, University of Denver, was thinking about, I think he majored in international development. And then he's like, it's right in my own backyard.
Yeah,
I'm coaching these kids soccer, and I've been through what they're going through. So he's the perfect
That's
mentor
great.
for that program.
Oh gosh, it's so important for young boys, especially, to have people they can look up to at that stage.
So they've been in existence, I think, 5 or 6 years and doing really good things.
Yeah, that's great. So what's next for you? You mentioned taking another church. Is that all settled, or is that just kind of up in the air still?
Well, we have a new bishop in Colorado, Kim Lucas, and that means some new people coming on the bishop's staff. So I've been trying to meet people either by phone, or I did meet Kim when I was in Colorado, which was great. I think she's going to be a great bishop for us. I'm 62, but I'm not ready to retire. So I took some training last year in interim ministry.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, so what I'd love to do is, a bunch of boomers are retiring, and, you know, churches then are in transition.
What a great ministry.
So I think with all my years in the parish, you know, I'd be good at that, and like to come in and, you know, you get to do the pastoral preaching stuff, but you also get to be a listener and a consultant and
help church
them
during a
kind
special time.
during that time of transition. So that's what I'm hoping my next job will be.
Great. And then, I mean, you're somebody who's like has a unique, synoptic view of the whole country. Like, what gives you hope right now, and as you look at this whole thing and where we are, you know?
Well, what gives me hope is, the people that I've met. This is probably a rather simple observation, but I think our media mainly focuses on the bad stuff that's happening in the world, and I understand that. There's a lot that's going on that just makes me shake my head and go, man, is this where we are? But I have a story now with this walk where there's a lot of faithfulness, goodness, generosity, and I don't think those stories get the same level of attention by any means.
Right.
I'm excited by the young people I meet.
Oh, I'm just excited by the young clergy I meet.
Yeah,
aren't they amazing? I mean,
and
stepping
of course,
up
I feel like there's a big transition happening in the church
Yeah.
on many levels, but one level is my generation is starting to retire,
Yeah.
and all these really dynamic younger people are coming in. And
yeah, I just love it. It just gives me so much
yeah.
hope for what's going to happen.
So, like when I meet the Hannah and
Right,
Canyons
in
of the
Canyon,
world,
yeah, exactly.
and my own children, I think they're both in schools, working in education,
Yeah.
and our daughter-in-law, and they're very committed, and they care about the environment, they care about kids, they care about social justice.
Yeah.
So that gives me hope.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. Well, we're so glad you made it, and we're so glad that you're okay, and we're glad that you have a chance to have a little bit of a vacation and a break from this. Because one of the questions I had, but I didn't ask because I didn't have time for, was just kind of like, what do you do to kind of like get back to your center other than the prayers? Like, can you take a vacation from it? But when every day is scheduled
it's pretty
out.
relentless.
Relentless.
I followed the Rockies. I'm a big baseball fan.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And they were terrible, but
yeah.
I followed them on my phone.
Oh, that's good. That's
Yeah,
one break. So this is the last fall forum of the fall season. So please join us on January 19th for a forum in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Until then, I hope to see you at the December events. We have so many Christmas concerts and services. You're also welcome to attend the Choral Eucharist at 11 o'clock. It should be a beautiful service. The men and boys choir are singing. And I also wanted to remind you to, if you can, make a gift to the forum on your way out. There's a little glass box. We're so grateful for you, Peter, and you give us hope out there in the world.
Thank you
for your project.
Thank you.